Hello, my name is Daniel Evans, and this is the Week 10 video reflection assignment for sports economics. And first off, based on what we learned in class, I'd like to talk about, as we all know, the man, the legend, Tom Brady has returned to football. And, I think that this has a lot to do with grit. Think about it, after football, what will he have? Yes, he's 43, and pretty sure 99.99% of football players, even at his level, still drop out. But well, you have to look forward to commercials, sponsorships, but he won't be playing football. He won't be doing what he was not meant to do, but what he's been doing. That's his main thing in his life now, and I think this grit is why he's returning. Anyways, also the talk in class about training and grit reminds me of how in the 80s in Prairie View High School, their football team, they had a coach named Haney Catchings, but the only problem was that, one of the main problem was that he was so harsh on training. Not only would they train for 6 hours, I think, but he'd also withhold their financial aid and their academic materials unless they trained enough, to the point where at one point only 12 athletes had GPAs above 2.0. So of course he was eventually kicked out for this, although this caused a losing streak. But this intense amount of grit he had to make them train harder and harder, it didn't help the team. It made them they had some decent seasons under him where they had winning seasons, but it made the teammates not like him. It made their athletics suffer, and that kind of grit's just not good. That's why he was fired. And then the team suffered a bad losing streak, so that could be indirectly his fault. Because if he had been a better coach, he wouldn't have been fired, which wouldn't have caused the bad a nicer coach, he wouldn't have been fired, which wouldn't have caused the bad losing streak. Also, I think that it's important to note, based on a few things we talked about in class, how there are probably a bunch of athletes, especially in football, that are in one role, but could be, if they were put in another role, they could probably be either better or worse. One example of the latter is how when Penn State played Iowa in football this year, Penn State's quarterback, Sean Clifford, got injured, so they put in the backup quarterback, who was not ready at all, did a terrible job, and cost Penn State the game. So that's one example. When the Broncos in 2020, when all their roster quarterbacks were out because of COVID, they put in a wide receiver who played football, a quarterback in high school, and he did a okay job. They only scored 3 points, but to be fair, they had lost some other players. The Saints were already a much better team, and weeks earlier, the Buccaneers had also only scored 3 points, so it could have been worse. But whether that was good or bad is up to the viewer. Also, I think that when it comes to normal physical training versus other forms of training, like behavioral, emotional, academic training, I think they're similar in that they require constant repetition of certain patterns. The progress isn't usually always there, and it's only the results don't usually always appear until near the end of the steps, and oftentimes it seems like there's no progress made for most of it. But I think that one difference is that in one way, physical training's results are more obvious. You go faster, you have better stats. Well, for academic training or things like that, or for behavioral or emotional training, for stress, sometimes it's hard to interpret. But on the other hand, with physical training, there could be a lot of outside factors. You're doing well in a game, but you played a worse team and things like that. Or it would be a lot of other people would have to make that, could possibly determine that, not just you. But with other forms of training, it would be easier for you to tell because you're the main one looking at this. You could also say that they're similar because for stuff like academic or behavioral training, there's also outside factors. But that's really up to every person to interpret on their own. But I liked how in class Professor Rizzo talked about how an indirect benefit of every kid that doesn't fail at a certain club, like a sports club, means that they won't discourage others as a result. Just like the talk of indirect benefits, because sports is a lot about indirect benefits. Also, I think that we talked about choking in class, and I think the Falcons choking badly in Super Bowl 52, 28-3, was how I think this demoralized their team's organization for years to come. Well, it's been demoralizing them, and I think it will continue to. Like they lost, you can't have grit like after something like that. People still make 28-3 jokes. Hell, when Auburn in college football blew a 28-3 lead in Mississippi State, a lot of people made jokes comparing them to Atlanta. So yeah, it's hard to build grit with something like that. Also, in the fourth Super Bowl the Bills were in, after losing 3 previous Super Bowls, there was not a lot of grit because according to the players themselves, there was not a lot of passion, even when the Bills were actually in the lead in the first half, although they later lost. So that shows the importance of grit, like how the lack of grit can kind of break not just a team playing like the Bills in the Super Bowl, but also a team spirit for years to come. Anyways, for my 4 discussion questions, the first one is, does more training always ensure that a team's better the more they train? And is there any actual correlation? If so, or if not, then why or why not? And is there a certain point where there is too much training? Haney Catchings above train them too much for 6 hours every training day. And I'm pretty sure, and considering that they only had bare winning seasons, barely above half, I'm pretty sure he trained them a bit too much for that kind of score. Also, is there any way to properly compare training methods of various teams and or of different sports to see which training method or methods are the best? Is there any sort of measurement metric we could use? This relates to this second question also relates to the training stuff Professor Rizzo talked about. As for the third question, is grit a possible factor in many teams choosing to hang on to bad coaches and in some cases bad players for a long period of time? It could be either the management's grit or just the coach being gritty with bad strategies, or insisting insisting to the management that they just give me one more chance. I know I'll do it this time. Not just because they want the job, but they also might genuinely believe thanks to their grit that they might be doing the right thing. Just hang on a little bit. As for my fourth and last question, does grit have any genuine association / correlation with greed? Especially in sports, but also in other places. Grit and greed are also kind of focus / obsession with something. So it just makes one wonder, if there any genuine association / correlation. Anyways, those were my 4 questions and my reflection on this week's 2 lectures. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good night.